thoughts on OpenClaw versus Cowork dispatch channels. I keep covering this because it's a really exciting topic. What happened back in December with the release of Claude and then January it really blew up, was the realization that we're moving from an AI that we chat to, go back and forward, we copy its responses, we go and work on that, it gives us a to-do list, whatever. So it was mainly chatting. For the last couple of years, that's how we've used AIs. We are now moving into a period where AIs actually go and do stuff for us. Ethan Mollick talked about the 4 big breakthroughs in AI. First one was GPT 3.5. That was the first public, like, oh, wow, these things are cool. GPT-4 was the next one, about 6 months later, which was when we realized the AIs were actually quite good. 3.5 was a rushed release. 4 was like, oh shit, there might be something to this. A year later, we had the reasoning models. O1 was the first one, which used chain of thought and other techniques to break down and deal with much larger problems. That was only a year ago, in March 2025, that we got reasoning models. Absolutely wild. The 4th breakthrough, according to Ethan Mollick, was in December 2025, which is agentic models, or agentic tools starting to work. So we had Claudebot, which later became OpenClaw, and then 2 weeks later, after OpenClaw blew up, we got Cowork. Cowork is basically OpenClaw for adults. I love OpenClaw. I think it's fantastic, but it's very, very risky. There's a lot of things that you need to do to make OpenClaw safe for yourself. There's a guy called Shadow, who's one of the maintainers of the OpenClaw project, who said, if you can't understand how to run a command line, this is far too dangerous of a project for you to use safely. They were literally saying, go away. If you're not comfortable with a command line, if you're not comfortable with security hardening, if you aren't comfortable setting up a virtual machine or a VPS, then maybe sit this one out because it's going to be too risky. We had a bunch of API keys that were stolen. We had horror stories like that Meta safety researcher. She had an OpenClaw which wiped out her inbox, deleted everything. So we have these horror stories. At the time I said, look, sit this one out, wait a month. One of the big labs will come out with something that is pretty much the same thing, but it's going to be a lot safer for you to use. And that is what Anthropic have been doing with Cowork. So all of these upgrades have been feeding into this Cowork system. The ability to talk to Cowork and to talk to code using dispatch, channels, and remote control is freeing us from our computer and allowing us to work from elsewhere. The fact that they added yesterday the ability to give Claude basically a Mac Mini or whatever computer you have and for it to control the computer, they're moving it closer to what OpenClaw is, but within the walled garden of the Anthropic system, so you get the additional security. That means what you're getting is less powerful, but much safer. So you are trading off power, but you are getting additional safety. For people who like to tinker, who need the maximum power, who are happy to play around with OpenClaw, make sure it's secure, keep up to date with what the new releases are, what the vulnerabilities are. If you love that kind of stuff, use OpenClaw. If you just want an assistant that does the job for you and you toggle it on with a couple of button presses, Claude Cowork and Claude Code in particular. There are other ones. There's Perplexity Computer. I don't personally see the point of it. I guess you could argue it's like Cowork with computer use, but it's multimodal, so you can use different models, whereas with Cowork you are locked into using the Claude models. Personally, I use Claude models for all of my main work anyway, so I'm fine being locked in with Claude. And then there's Manus's agent, which doesn't really stack up against the other ones, in my opinion. So I think what Claude are doing is listing everything that made OpenClaw awesome and blasting out every single feature that we need. So I'm sure we'll see the ability for it to activate itself every half an hour, every 10 minutes or so to check on what it should be doing and whether it should be proactively reaching out or pushing forward a project. I'm sure we'll have that very soon because they can look at what made OpenClaw popular. They can look at what made OpenClaw pop off and become the most popular, successful open source project of all time. And they can put them on a whiteboard and go through them one at a time using their big team of engineers and their unlimited usage of Claude Code, which allows them to do this, just to ship. Every single day we have something new. So for me, if I was a betting man, I would be betting on Claude, putting together something really interesting. OpenAI are still kind of in the race because they have hired Peter Steinberger, the creator of OpenClaw. He's working on something for them, presumably a ChatGPT version of OpenClaw, We haven't seen anything, which worries me a bit, because whilst he's working in secret, the Claude team are shipping. And some of it's a bit rubbish, like remote control, but at least we can tell them on Twitter, we can say, hey, remote control is crap. And the Claude team's like, yeah, we know, we'll fix it, sorry. Whereas if you were building in secret, whatever ChatGPT you're building with Peter Steinberger, you're not going to get that same level of feedback from your actual users. So I'm very bullish on Claude right now.